My name's Dave Holmes, and I am a dad of two young boys who are 12 and 10, Hudson and Lincoln, and my wife Bonnie. We live right here in Fells Point and have enjoyed calling Fells Point our home since 2001.
So give us a brief overview of what the Marketplace at Fells Point project was, and if you can give us some like yearly milestones or something,
Sure.
or what happened, what year kind of thing.
So in 2005, a good friend of mine, Dan Winter, who also lived in Fells Point with his family, he and I decided to embark on doing a development project together. We both independently were contractors and developers, but at over lunch one afternoon, we decided that maybe it was time that he and I would partner up on a particular project. Not soon thereafter, I thought the perfect project to get started on was some of the properties that were actually currently on the market on the 600 block of South Broadway. There were 3 properties on the east side that I felt were a good opportunity for us to put our skills together, and more importantly, an opportunity to help revitalize a block that we've always felt struggled. Not soon thereafter, we decided that perhaps the block should be looked more comprehensively, and we looked at other properties that were on both east and west sides of the 600 block of South Broadways. And that really began this very long journey of the Marketplace at Fells Point. Those initial 8 properties that we purchased began the assemblage, what would end up being close to 40 parcels that we had purchased and consolidated in order to complete enough critical mass to develop the Marketplace project.
So kind of what was a blow-by-blow?
Sure.
You started buying properties here?
In 2000, and by the end of 2005, and it took almost 2.5 years to purchase and assemble the properties. During that time, we began the process to have a plan unit development, or a PUD. It's a zoning process. It's an overlay over the existing zones that would give any developer or any property owner rights that would be beyond the current zoning. That enabled us to look at this project on a larger scale. Why that was important is we felt like this block had great potential to be more than just kind of the entrance into Lower Fells Point. Broadway Market being right there at the at Broadway and Fleet Street, we felt like it was a perfect opportunity to create a gateway that would not only embrace some of the historic fabric of what that block represented over the years, but would also give an opportunity for Fells Point to have further growth and bring in a mixed use of development that Fells Point historically just hasn't had, largely just because it's, 1, been landlocked, but 2, it's just very, very hard to consolidate a couple of properties together, let alone 40. So we really had felt that we were being entrusted with the community, with the city, and on trying to map out a strategy in a way that would help not only this block but for Fells Point. And that really was kind of the cornerstone of our mission with this project. The zoning was really comprehensive, and it was challenging. The community at that point was a little unsure of really what would be the importance of these 2 blocks in playing a role in the future of Fells Point. And so while we were still pursuing the zoning of the plan unit development, we worked very closely with the community on trying to map out what the development could look like. So there's really 2 parallel paths here. There's one where you have the PUD, which gives us kind of an envelope to work within. So for instance, here are the 2 blocks, the west and the east side of South Broadway, 600 block of South Broadway. We were working with the mayor and council on creating a plan unit development that would give us an envelope so that we would have a platform that we would then work with the community on what that should end up being at the end of the day. So because trying to get a design and or trying to have that right concept out of the gates is almost impossible, and nor do we want to rush it either. But the zoning process takes such a long time as well too. They're really parallel paths, so that once we have a zoning overlay, it gives us the ability to then go back to the community and say, okay, now we know we're only going to build to this height. We're only having this much square feet, this much parking, this much retail. And now as the community, what is it that we should be doing with this cube on east and the west side? And so when the PUD was finished, and that was approved in 2007, I believe, towards the end of the year, by then Mayor Sheila Dixon. And that was kind of a milestone for us then to continue the journey on. There was still some more assemblages that we needed. You would wonder, well, how can you get a PUD through a process of without owning all the real estate? You don't have to own all the real estate in order to have a PUD. You can pick any block anywhere in the city, and as long as you have 2 acres or greater, the city will allow all of those property owners to participate in planned unit development. And so for us, we knew that there were still some critical pieces that we needed, but we also knew that we needed to include them in the PUD in order for this to work at the end of the day. The risk is that we may never get that assemblage, but as long as the property owner was on board with having his parcel included in the PUD, that worked well for us in terms of staying on a certain timeline. And so we were able to convince all of the property owners that we felt were within the footprint of our development to be a part of the PUD. There's nothing negative to have that as running with your title of your land. If anything, it was probably more of a benefit for them. It created probably value because again, PUDs don't happen that often, and when they do, it does give whoever owns that a little bit more density rights and some other opportunities that they would have otherwise not have under the existing zoning.
Okay.
So in 2009, I believe that we had finally assembled all of the pieces at that point. And as you know, 2008 started a very tough recession, not only through here in Baltimore, but throughout the country. And right as we were moving forward to start the development, began a very long and painful chapter of trying to get the project out of the ground. We had, at that point, not only finished all the assemblage, finished up all the required zoning requirements, but we also had the design was approved through the planning department, as well as the CHAP, which is the Commission for Historic Preservation. And that only happens with the approval of the community group. So a very long process, a lot of ideas and designs that were flushed through, and that gave us finally the final set of designs that we then had our architect team put into construction drawings. Construction drawings were already at that point permitted and ready to go. So the only thing we were missing was construction financing. And that was throughout 2009 and 2010. We met with just about every group out there that we felt would be a good partner with us on this journey. I should point out that from the beginning, we always knew we were going to bring on an equity partner on this project, which would be very common for a project of this size. So the recession really had nothing to do whether we were going to do this ourselves and or bring in an equity partner. It was always our intent. Like most projects, you usually bring an equity partner in once you've finished your assemblage, your zoning. Once you get it to a point where an equity partner then truly would have an interest in coming in and not necessarily be part of all the risk in getting to that stage. So we knew that we probably would get through all of that approval process and bring on our equity partner. It's just unfortunate by the time we got to that point, the recession was so deeply embedded in the financial markets that it was virtually impossible not only to get debt financing, but to even get an equity group to even look at Baltimore, let alone our own project. So that went on for about a year and a half, and at that point we knew that we were kind of running out of options in terms of getting this project to move forward. The longer it went on, the concern was that some of the approval processes were going to expire. If you're unable to start your development project at a certain time, your permits then ended up expiring. And the concern was that the community group was getting a little nervous, wondering at this point, was this project ever going to happen? And if it didn't, was that because the design itself, the number of units. So our concern was that it could start to kind of break apart. And worst case is that we would end up having to be forced to sell the parcels in pieces and or in wholes, depending on if there was buyers out there. So we started getting a little concerned that what we had promised the community all along was now at a point where we may end up not only unable to develop the project, but now left with the scarred vacant land of certain properties that were already torn down and partial properties that were torn down that without having a development ready to go in its place. So very concerning. And so we started turning our attentions to then a sale and or a sale with maybe some limited participation on our end. I say that only just because at this point, any project that was unable to get developed nationally were being foreclosed, were being, you had other development groups that were looking to capitalize on other folks' misfortune. And so we were concerned that if we didn't try to cut the right deal with the right group, that we would end up finding ourselves in a situation that was not going to be a positive the result for the community. And so we had decided at this point to collapse all our equity in the project to make it more enticing for a community group. We might have, at that point, had about $10 million worth of our own equity in the deal that we decided to just collapse, meaning to write it off. That certainly started opening up doors to other development groups to come in. And one was the Dolman Group out of Boston. They showed a strong interest in it. We liked them right at the beginning just because they were interested in exactly what we had promised the community group. There were other groups that had came forth, but they wanted to unravel the construction drawings. They wanted to change the design. They wanted to change the envelope. And we were definitely afraid of going down any of those paths just because it's not what we had promised the community group. So Dolman, in short order, became kind of a clear choice because for that one reason, we knew that they were committed to completing what we had started.
Okay. And so can you give me dates for when you started talking to them, when that was closed, when the construction began, and when the construction completed?
Great. These are great questions. I'm going to say sometime in 2011, we started talking to the Dolman Group. They were great. They came in, they worked very hard on trying to move this to a close. One of the concerns that they had was making sure that that all the approvals that we had were still locked in. You know, they were concerned that we were so closely a part of this whole project that if we had walked away or given it to them, that they were we knew the project so well. We knew all the parties involved. We had our relationships with them, and that they were concerned. So we worked very closely with them and quickly on trying to not only get them comfortable with all these approvals were still valid, but that we would assist and stay through on as part of the deal. And there wasn't any financial incentives for us at this point. We collapsed our equity. We were essentially selling them the 100% of the development project itself, all the land that goes with it, and in exchange for them developing exactly what we had set out and what was approved, and that I would stay through that whole until they still broke ground, that I would be at every meeting that they needed. And so it was fun working with them. They really had the same vision that we did. They saw the same opportunities here that we felt were here in terms of breaking ground on something that would really have an important gateway into Lower Fells Point. So I think that was early 2012, I believe, that we closed on all that, and that soon thereafter they started construction.
Okay.
And construction took 18 months, I believe, maybe. I can't remember it, but it was right. Less than 2 years, I know that. But okay. Again, a very complicated project because it's an infill, so you have a lot of historic buildings that were surrounding it, and then of course you had the front
Just think
wall.
if you'd have taken that $10 million and bought a home. Wow.
You know, Kraig, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think of what else I could have done with,
What a
you know.
house.
Yeah.
I mean, you would have had a heliport and
all right, you're sabotaging my interview.
Unbelievable swimming pools and just all.
Well, again, I should point out just
I'm done.
transparency here. I mean, although a bulk of that was my equity in it, but we had other, partners. Dan had, a significant amount of money.
Thing,
yeah.
So that was just a little humor.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Okay.
I'm done.
So all that is, except the repercussions, is in the past.
Yeah.
And the marketplace has been done for several years
Yeah.
now. What do you think that the project has contributed to Fells Point?
All right, so the project, the marketplace project is really two projects. You have the retail portion, and then you have the residential. The residential has just been a big success for the Dolben Klein Group, and I say that because there really was a strong need for apartments in Lower Fells Point. While we have while there are projects that have been developed here in Fells Point along the water's edge, they had leased up very quickly when they were finished, and we knew that there was still an appetite and a demand for apartments within a certain block radius of the square in Fells Point. And so, and again, there's just not any more land that you could develop, or it would be impossible for you to assemble enough real estate to build a project of this size. So it was something that we knew there was a market for, and that ended up proving to be the case. They've done very well on the multifamily side of this. The retail is the other portion, and while there are a few pieces of the retail puzzle that have been leased, a lot of it hasn't, and I think that is a direct relationship to the market building in the center. And funny thing is that we had from the beginning took on this project recognizing that one of the critical issues of why the markets themselves have suffered and why the real estate in the east and the west blocks of 600 block of South Broadway suffered is because of the market shed on the 600 block. It just has this uninviting brick, single structure brick that you go in one door and out the other, and parking aligns itself right along the side of it. And so it doesn't really contribute anything positive, not only to itself, but also to the real estate that it faces. And so that still is the case today. If you look at the project and walk up and down the street, the market shed is still an eyesore, and I think that has negatively impacted the retail for the Dolben Klein Group.
Do you think Dolben Klein is happy with their investment, or still moderately unhappy because of the problems with the retail?
No, I would say that they're probably happy with the investment. Credit to them, they came in at the right time. It was a good buy, and they managed the construction well. And so at the end of the day, they were able to bring online 159 apartments that financially I think that they did well on. There is certainly a cost that the retail has. There's the space was built, so there's a carrying cost there that is real. But I think that the multifamily certainly absorbs that burden, and for them, the retail eventually will happen. They're still going to figure this out and try to determine where's the next course of action here. But for them, I don't think there's any regrets at all. And to be honest with you, it's kind of a neat project to have in your portfolio. Up till now, the Dolben Group has really been more of a market, more of a multifamily apartment group that was suburban. So they really had a lot of garden-style complexes. And the Klein Group was really retail, strip centers out in the county and up and down the Mid-Atlantic. So for them, this was an exciting opportunity to come in, not only an urban project, but one that I think in a very desired market. And so I know that they enjoy having this project.
Okay, great. All right, so now let's talk about the Broadway markets a little bit more. And the question that I had written down was, the Broadway markets were part of the marketplace plans almost as long as that project existed. Briefly summarize why and what is the current relationship between the two. And you already introduced part of it in terms of the aesthetic and not looking open.
Yeah, so again, when we started, we purchased these 3 properties when we initially started, and then we jumped the street, and then there were 5 that were right over here that we purchased. And the more we studied what we would do with the redevelopment of this, the more we recognized that the Broadway Market building itself on the 600 block had to be, was significantly the reason why I think this block suffered. And at the same time, it had to be a reason why it was going to succeed, that piece had to be something more than just a structure in its current state. We had envisioned adding the second story back on. Historically, when it was built in 1864, it was this beautiful 2-story structure with a nice large cupola on top. And for us, that really was an important part of the marketplace project. We felt like it was a strong anchor to come into Lower Felt Point. We felt it was a wonderful opportunity to introduce the community to the city, that this truly is a gateway, just like the Under Armour Hotel does it from the water side. We felt like this was a great opportunity coming in from Fleet Street. And so for us, that whole journey always included making sure that market piece was a part of it and was a strong anchor for the success of that project. And so that truly was the journey and our objective all along. And I still feel that way today. And I think even the Dolben Group, the Klein Group, would tell you too that they realize now that that's the case. When we had sold this project off to them, we had encouraged them to take the market piece with it. We had a relationship with the mayor and council on a long-term lease with that market shed. And at that time, I think that they felt like they were already taking on what in their minds was already kind of a tough, challenging project in a sense of the assemblage and the construction. Still, there were some unknowns. You're swinging cranes over historic buildings. And so I felt like they really just didn't want to take on anything more than what they've already had purchased. And so they felt like somebody else can handle that piece. And we remained committed to that after the Dublin purchased the East and the West blocks. We aligned ourselves with Workshop and Doug Schmidt's group, who at this point have a strong track record of redevelopment and Harbor East and with the Canton Crossing project over in Canton. And we thought that it was a perfect blend of their experience and our relationship with this project. The other thing is this project was also one of the stops on the Red Line. And the Workshop group already had a project that was that they had developed, and Harbor East that was one of the Red Line stops, and the Canton Crossing project was another Red Line stop. So this would have been their third development for a Red Line stop. So it made a lot of sense for them, and we felt it was a good fit for us as well too. So we remain committed to see the redevelopment of the sheds, and so we spent another year working with them on what should this market shed be. And so while we had always envisioned a certain redevelopment, adding the second floor back on and a few other things, they were quick to try to see if that really even made financial sense. And why that's important is just because they're like any group, they want to make sure financially this works for them. But as much as they would have loved to have seen the second floor added back on, if there's not really any financial benefit to that, they needed to flush out that right away before they were going to commit any more further time and funds on this project. And so not soon after that we had agreed that the cost was just too much. It would be one thing if we as a group had both East and West blocks and we were able to digest the cost of the markets in with the development of the Market Piece project.
Is that what you were originally thinking of?
Correct.
Yeah.
And so you can almost say, okay, the cost to add that second floor on is pretty high. And what we would do with it, you collect some rents for some use. You know, we looked at everything from boutique office space to a reception hall. And so there would certainly generate some money. And the first floor obviously as well too is a retail space. But you can almost break even that model if you digest it with the construction of the East and West blocks. By itself, it's just almost doesn't really even come close. And so while we were hopeful, we recognized short order that that wasn't going to work by itself. And so we continued to work with Workshop on what was a revised concept of utilizing the existing single structure that was on the 600 block, but opening it up from all four sides, having glass and doors and windows all around it, getting rid of the parking that was paralleled right up against the sides of the building, and really allowing it to breathe from all four sides and allowing it to have a positive reflection back to the retail for the Dublin Klein properties. So for us, we felt like, you know, at the end of the day, if you can't build a second floor, this is probably the next best thing. And so we presented those concepts to the community group and to the mayor and council and market board. And we were able to then move forward with a commitment on those approvals with the revised concept. But the Recession still was slowly being kind of coming out of ground. If anything was getting financed, it really was more residential So retail still was always just kind of a lag index, not only here in Baltimore, but across the nation. And so it wasn't as if banks were eager to kind of jump on a redevelopment of market sheds that haven't really had much of a good proven track record. And now you're embarking on a new concept. So it's just really tough for any banks to digest. And so while that parallel track was going on, finding end users was also challenging too. And it's kind of ironic. In some ways, you have the red line stop was our draw. We, had shown up a lot of different meetings with that kind of in our hand, that this it could be a flagship for any type of boutique retailer that would be on the first floor because the red line stop is right there. Yet at the same time, you're talking 2 years of construction, not just a little construction. You're digging a massive hole right at the front of what you've been promising people as the gateway of Lower Fells Point. So it was a struggle to get anybody to get excited. What we got was, come see me after the red line is built, and we would love to be there. And so we found ourselves kind of struggling to find what we felt was the perfect candidate for that space. And we started to realize that the concern was without a kind of a Class A retailer there, you're marketing yourself as a kind of a second tier type retailer that really wasn't going to be able to bring the type of fanfare that you would want for a structure you're putting a lot of money back into. Not soon thereafter, and this is when the Hogan administration came in 2014, and then put the kibosh on the red line. And so you would think, all right, well, that should be good for retailers now to kind of get over that fact. But the landscape for retail still didn't improve. Debt financing was still a little challenging. And at this point, I think even Workshop, one of the reasons why they got into it was because of the red line stop. And so it wasn't quite as exciting, I think, for them to stay committed to it, just because, one, at best, the project was probably going to break even. And two, there's that risk of even finding the ideal tenant may necessarily yield the type of results that you wanted. We've already had noticed that the Dolben Group still wasn't leasing much, so there was still a lot of uncertainty that was going on here. Even though I kind of look at everything a little optimistically, I felt like if you really had redeveloped everything all at once and you were able to create the right atmosphere with that, with the center of 600 block of South Broadway, I think that would have brought everybody, would have brought all that retail online together, and you could have created a strong focal point. But when you do it in bits and pieces, yeah, you might get some folks that might walk up from the waterfront, look around, and walk back. There's not much going on. Maybe some folks are driving down from Fleet Street. And when you have kind of scattered retail, it doesn't really lend itself to a positive experience, and less likely people are going to walk that block again, given another opportunity. So unfortunately, the retail side of this is still fragmented, and until something happens with the market itself, I think that the Dolben piece of this will still remain scattered in terms of retail.
Now, Dolben was apparently the one bidder on the RFP that the city put out to redevelop the markets. Do you know anything about that?
So again,
and you don't know anything that you can say. We don't have to talk about
sure.
it.
No, out of the gates, it was no surprise. I think that Dan Klein is Dolben's partner. Dan felt like, it's too expensive to build up. It's kind of expensive to renovate, and you need the right tenant. Now, for them, again, owning East and the West blocks, if I was them, I would think if I could just get it to break even, that in itself would be a good thing for my retail. If I could just come up with the right concept for the right cost. But if you could just eliminate it altogether, maybe in Dan's mind, that might even just be the best of everything, because now you don't even have to worry about the risk. You don't have to worry about the cost. And you have now this amazing green space that you could create a really focal point, open focal point for not only your residents in your apartment buildings, but now it creates an opportunity for the retail from one side to the other to actually stare at each other, that open vista, so that they can have that positive retail energy, have that spill out into what would be a really cool open space. So I see why Dan felt like, let's just tear it down. It hasn't had any positive significance to Fells Point in a very long time. I mean, even when it was functioning as a market, it was a fractured market in a sense that you had vendors that were there for a long time, but after the 90s, a lot of vendors started moving out. They started closing up portions of the market shed. When we renovated the South Shed, we pulled the remaining merchants out just because you couldn't attract really anybody to want to be in there. And when you have retailers like Whole Foods just a few blocks away, it's hard for the sustainability of any retailer to go in and have a stall that's 20 by 20 and compete with the likes of Whole Foods. So I think that's in Dan's mind, it just make sense to maybe just get rid of something that hasn't really have a positive impact for the community. And in that sense, I would agree. Of course, there's the flip side. There's now a historic building. There's not.
Okay, let me just ask one clarification. When you talk about tearing it down, is this your speculation of what he was thinking, or do you know that that's what he was thinking?
No. I think there's been articles that have been out there that certainly was one idea. Okay. Now, I can't speak whether the Klein Group had put in an RFP directly to tear it down at one point, if they were considering that as one of their first choices. But there's no speculation. I mean, that was always something I think that was always floating out there. I mean, even when Dan and I first looked at this project, there were folks on the planning board that felt like maybe we should tear it down. And so I think there's always been whispers throughout the community that maybe that should be considered.
Okay.
But I agree. When you look at nationally, there's not too many cities that still have its market system. You have few cities that have a market, and the ones that succeed, that do very well, like the Reading Terminal in Philadelphia or Eastern Market in DC, they succeed because there's enough critical mass, and also there's not really much competition surrounding right where those markets are. So they're iconic in a sense that they've been that way for decades, and people have a favorable impression of those markets. Here in Fells Point, there's just not that connection. We have a new generation of folks living, working, shopping here in Fells Point, and they don't know that history. They don't have that connection with the historic market. So for them, their choices really, there's a lot of choices for them to go, whether it's to eat or to buy produce or meats. And it's almost, you look at that space and you need to try to figure out, how can I fit this space into now kind of a new generation of what they want in a historic market. And maybe the concept of the market itself needs to be looked at. That we had felt like the North Shed building itself would be ideal for a single operator that would look and feel like a market, but they would have the whole 6,000 square feet of retail space and operate as a single entity. That was always kind of our thoughts on that. But and that at the end of the day may end up being that concept. Even if the market board stays involved in it, they may say that we think the best outcome for this is to maybe have one operator, maybe two at the most. And that would make a little more sense than to try to go back to historically a series of stalls and having kind of a market feel to it in that respect. So I know that Dan Klein had put in the RFP to create this amphitheater, and I thought that was a great idea. And I say that just because I felt like if you're unable to tear it down, if I'm the Dolben Klein group, if I can't tear it down and create this amazing open space, then I want to be able to reinvent this building into something that could just be amazing in itself. And yeah, you could have a single retail tenant and fix up the outside and have it function from all sides. But I'm not really any different than the retail that you have the next block down and the next block down from there and along the waterfront. I'm still just a retail space that someone is operating out of. But if I could have just a different twist to that, if I could have an operator that would bring something that there's nowhere else in Fells Point. An amphitheater I thought was just that. I thought it was a combination of retail and entertainment. And I think it would be a real strong destination and a draw to that whole block. Okay, so they've gone beyond the concept of just having a retail tenant in that space to now an operator of what would be kind of more entertainment than it would be retail. I thought it was brilliant.
They didn't really sell it to the community.
No, they didn't. So, and look, I feel like the community has been along this journey for a long time, and God bless them for still being passionate about, at the end of the day, what is it that we want Fells Point to be, and what is it that we want, particularly the markets at this point, Fells Point Market, what roles do we want that to play in the future? And of course, a lot of folks don't even understand that concept that well. I think that was probably a big part of it. They heard something that I think that they felt like could be fun, could be exciting, but at the end of the day, the risk to them was it may not end up being as exciting as you think, and so what are we left with is now even a further fractured shed building that we were trying so hard to protect. And now you run that risk that may go dark. It's not, the operator can't keep that energy going. And so now we're one step further or closer to what's remaining of this shed. Maybe at that point you tear it down. And so I get it. I feel like their concerns are they're good concerns, especially given the rocky journey that the market sheds have had. It really has been, and it should have not really been this challenging, but when you add up all the different circumstances and the recession and the red line, my gosh, this poor building, has been lumped and thrown around and kicked around. And now I get it that you're at a point where the community's really concerned, but also confused as to, my gosh, do we have anything else that we could do here that to preserve the history, preserve the building, and yet make sure that we're on the right track for something that the future of Fells Point really would benefit from,
So what's your personal vision for what should happen with the markets, especially the North Market?
Wow. I would tell you a couple of years ago, I would say, add that second floor back on if it's ever possible, raise dollars, I feel like that still feel like that it would be a great gateway to Lower Fells Point.
What would have been the cost of it?
Oh my goodness.
Just roughly.
Yes.
You must have looked at that.
We have. We were talking maybe $2-3 million to add that second floor back on. Big cost is those windows. Those windows were they were huge, 8 feet by 16 feet with a curved top to it. So and I can't even tell you how many of them there were. There were a lot.
Would it be at all possible for the city to actually go in and do that?
Well, it's their asset. They own it. They could. I guess they probably, like any good city agency, would want the community's input on it. I think a lot of the community would probably think that would be great. And a couple of years ago, I would have said, yeah, that would be great. I will say that while I feel like that would be ideal, I wonder now if the retail on the 600 block would be better off not having anything right in front of it. When you add that second floor back on, this was always something that came to us while we were developing it, is that you create kind of a canyon, a dark, and you wonder if you're doing something more positive than negative by creating now a much large structure that creates kind of a shadow on one portion of the day and then a shadow on the other portion of the day. And I still live here in Fells Point. I still walk down that street all the time. My kids and I ride our bikes down it, and I still kind of reflect back on, what do you do? Where do you go from here? If I was the Dolben and Klein group, I would be really thinking, how do I get some excitement on this block when you have a structure right at your doorstep? And great question. I don't even know, to be honest with you. What would I do? That's tough. I can.
Well, you worked with a lot of architects and designers too. Did anybody have any interesting ideas for that building, or were they just like directed for, put the second floor on like you wanted, or were there any other ideas out there?
So no, I think everybody loved that concept. I think we all bought into it because we felt like, wow, when you look at the old photos, you say to yourself, just itself is iconic. Just itself would be a stamp of this block is important, is significance. Look at this structure we have. And so I don't think there was anybody that was like, you're going in the wrong direction. There was an idea that had surfaced that we did give it some thought, and you see this every so often in other cities where you have an old structure where you're not rebuilding it, but you leave the foundation walls and you leave where the windows were, and maybe you have some old beams that create kind of an outline of what that roof line would look like, so that you're leaving kind of a ghost.
Yeah, we
structure.
saw some buildings like that in Berlin a few years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I kind of thought, that could work. And I think, that would certainly be better maybe for the Dolben group to at least feel like there's some connection between the east and the west block. You kind of see through. It may create kind of a fun experience for people to walk through, maybe read some information about the markets right there. And so, I feel like that maybe that's the answer. You're not tearing it down, but you're also not building it. But do I feel like there should be a large structure in front of there anymore? It is a longtime resident here. I think that would be great. But as a developer and one who really can appreciate where the Dolben group and the Klein group are and trying to get that retail out of the ground, I would be thinking something, much different than two. And I don't know if a large structure in front of my door would be the right thing. I don't know. It's a tough thing. It really is.
As a resident that has never had to be a developer,
Yeah.
when I was thinking about this whole project, and I was thinking about your project and what the marketplace and what do I do with all this old filming, and I thought, this whole thing started, the community got really excited about that market.
Yeah.
And that's almost, I think, one of the big selling points for the marketplace project was rebuilding the North Market.
Yeah.
And everybody went along with it and put up with everything.
Yeah.
And then in the end, the only thing that didn't happen was the North
Was that?
Market.
Yeah, which is kind of ironic. That's hard. I mean, like I said, we fell in love with this project because we believed in that market building. Chris Ryer was involved in planning, and it was Chris Ryer that said we should tear it down. And I remember Dan and I walking out of that planning meeting. This is like 2006, so this was really early on. And we thought, oh, how can you tear it down? Like, if anything, we were like, let's go the other direction. And then that's really, I think it was Chris saying that prompted us to feel like, let's go the other direction and let's celebrate the building and not tear it down. And I still, part of me finds it, I struggle with, the fact that we were so supported by the community because of that. And I still struggle with the fact that they looked and relied so much on Dan and I to pull us all the way through. And the fact that we were unable to get what they really wanted at the end of the day was that. It still sits with me. I still think about that. And to me, I don't blame them for being a little gun shy now with any group coming forth promising anything to do with the markets, As much as I felt like the amphitheater was a great concept, I could appreciate the fact that they would be a little concerning about that after all they've been through.
Well, I think part of the problem was just that they really didn't try to sell the community on that vision at all.
Yeah.
There was no explanation of it. There was that one umbrella meeting that they had, but there were no presentations at community groups or anything. There was no outreach. It just, it was like this thing, and of course everybody at Fells Point reacts negatively to everything at first.
Yeah, well, that's right. And it doesn't help that, that these are two large groups coming in,
Yeah. But okay, so just kind of one more question.
Sure.
But you've had a lot of knowledge that the rest of us don't have. Do you think that there's a reasonable hope that if the Market Authority wanted to rejuvenate the North Market, that it would be moderately successful anyway? Because that's what the community, at least the average community member, seems to want. But whether they would actually support it or whether it would be actually successful, I don't know that.
Mm-hmm. So the answer to your question, yeah, they certainly can. And they can do that just because they own the real estate. When we were working a deal out with the Market Authority, we had hammered out a partnership which was shared revenues with the Market Authority. And so there's a base fee, and then if we're successful, some of that trickles back down to the Market Authority. And that was no different than when Workshop got involved, and no different than, I'm sure, with Dan Klein's group. The city, and it's doing the right thing here. You just can't take these assets and just hope that someone does the right thing. They're not going to sell the asset to you, but that lease structure has to be just right to give them as much protection as possible. But at the same time, recognizing that that if they're successful, they should as well, because of how initially these leases get structured. They can absorb. They can underwrite a much different return than we could. So we have equity partners, and then we have debt. And the banks and the equity partners need to make sure that this project brings a certain return. If it doesn't, neither group has an interest in it. So there's always this hurdle or a benchmark that this project has to financially work. If I'm the Market Authority and my objective is to make the community feel as if this asset benefits them, and I'm not looking for a return in a sense of a dollar commitment, but if I can get the project to just pay its bills, then maybe I fill my requirement by providing a benefit to the community. And so, yeah, they have the ability to make these markets work. That being said, they need capital, and that capital the city just doesn't have. If it does pull capital from somewhere else, that means where's the benefit from that project that could have been, now it's being over here, and was this benefit worthy for the loss of that? So there's always this kind of back and forth as to what's the right thing to do for all the citizens of the city. And but at the end of the day, yeah, they certainly can find the right model. If not, they would not be spending the amount of money they are with the Lexington market. And I think that they're looking at all of their markets and recognizing there's really great opportunity here in reinventing what should these sheds be for the community. I don't see the Market Authority creating little shells again, stalls inside, and having people have 20 feet by 20 feet. But I do think, like the Belvedere Square, when that was finished, that always seemed to be like a great concept that I think you could carry that into some of these smaller structures. So yeah, I think the market could do it.
I think we didn't cover it exactly in the order and everything, but I think we've covered everything here. Is there anything else that you'd like to say, or that you think I should have asked?
Yeah, no, I think these were all good questions. Yeah. Yeah, when I think back of all the different twists and turns, I think it's, I think you've captured it all, but yeah.
Okay.
So.
Thank you.
No, my pleasure. It was fun.
Okay.